Well, my personal role, of course, is I'm in overall charge of the center, but the center's responsibilities are twofold. Firstly, the center is a secretariat for ClimDev Africa, which is a continental initiative of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, of the Africa Union Commission, and of the African Development Bank. ClimDev Africa is designed to support African member states, firstly on investment in weather and climate observation systems, analysis of weather and climate data, but also on the development of climate-related policies, strategies, and plans. This includes supporting countries to develop their nationally determined contributions. It includes the implementation of the Africa Climate Change Strategy. It includes assisting countries to access climate funds to implement their plans and strategies. It is a continental, a Pan-African program and initiative, so it has got many aspects and is implemented in many countries. UNECA does a lot of research and analysis. It generates data and statistics to understand what is happening with climate change and development. We also generate a lot of data to understand issues such as financing for climate change, such as the impacts of climate change on African economies, information regarding the effectiveness of climate policies, the effectiveness of climate governance institutions. And out of those analyses, we propose solutions, we propose best practices. We also support African governments to develop capacities or to enhance the capacities which they already have to implement climate actions. We support Africa's participation in global climate governance. So, for instance, Africa's participation in the COPs, the conferences of parties of the UN Convention on Climate Change, and a whole lot of other continental capacity as well as analytical support that we extend to African member states. We also work with the African Union, the African Development Bank, as I have said, in addition to working with governments. We also work with regional economic communities. We work with regional climate centers and other stakeholders that are not in the government policy-making circles. We are also trying to ensure that the private sector is engaged in climate change and in climate action. So, for instance, one of the most recent initiatives that we were involved in was the development of the Africa Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy. This was finalized and adopted by the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change in 2023. So the continent now actually has a cohesive, comprehensive mechanism to direct development of policies and strategies at the national level. It is a very significant development. In addition to that, we have also, as I indicated, supported the Africa Group of Negotiators in their thinking around the question of what kind of climate finance is required for the continent. And in addition, every year we convene what is called the Climate Change and Development in Africa Conference, which is a mechanism to bring many of the stakeholders on climate change from the continent together to discuss key emerging issues on climate change, but effectively also to contribute to the Africa Common Position on climate change. Exactly. So, in fact, funding is one of the main obstacles to implementing the climate response in Africa. Africa, I think, gets less than 15% of climate funds globally, both from public sources, but also in the form of investment, private investment in climate. This is significant because Africa accounts for less than 5% of the problem of climate change, less than 5% of emissions, and yet receives less than 15% of available funding. But in addition, most of the funding that the continent accesses is in the form of loans rather than in the form of grants. Now, remember, the continent already has a big problem of debt. debt for development assistance, and so on. So climate finance is adding to this debt problem that the continent is experiencing. So financing is the biggest fundamental problem limiting climate action in Africa. But there are other problems as well. We mentioned the fact that we do have limited capacities to design climate actions, to implement climate actions. So this is an additional problem to the fiscal space. Further than that, we also have experienced issues in terms of balancing climate change with the development imperatives of the continent. So on the one hand, the African continent is beginning to contribute many of our own resources to support climate responses. In some estimates done by ECA, up to 9% of GDP is now being diverted towards climate actions. Now, as you know, this is money that could have gone to support education, to support health, to support infrastructure, and so on. And so there are several layers of the challenge of the climate response on the continent. But the biggest one, as you say, is in fact funding climate response. Opportunities to strengthen resilience, there are several opportunities. And in fact, there are many solutions that are coming out of the continent. One of those is the use of our own natural resources and natural ecosystems to contribute towards mitigating the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. Ethiopia is a global leader through the Green Legacy initiative, which has planted many millions, billions of trees, which are going to contribute towards not only stabilizing ecosystems, but also increase their capacity to absorb carbon dioxide. The other possibility for the continent is we also have a lot of resources for renewable energy, sun, wind, as well as hydroelectric. The limitation to that is, of course, the investments in renewable energy remain very low, but there are opportunities for the continent to actually develop in a way that does not increase our emissions and does not make the climate change issue worse. Another potential contribution that the continent can make, in addition to the nature-based solutions as well as the renewable energy, is that the continent is designing new development policies. Development policies that in fact can take cognizance of the mistakes that have been made in the past and chart a new development pathway. So in that regard, Africa can be a model for the rest of the world on how to develop in ways that put perfect balance between the climate system, between nature, and between society. So firstly, there is, I think in the last few years, a very real advantage to being located in Ethiopia and to actually observing in practice many of the models that the country is implementing become a reality. I just talked about electric vehicles. Now, if you go outside, most of the vehicles that you see, the new vehicles that you see on the road, are electric vehicles. It is very, very encouraging to actually see an African country take global leadership on the deployment of clean technologies. Also, I think it is an advantage to interact particularly with young people. We have programs that have sought to develop capacities of young African policymakers, young lawyers in climate change, but also to support capacity building in climate-related institutional skills, such as, for instance, the Climate Research for Development initiative, which we implemented for several years, where we had young people carrying out detailed research over several years on key issues on climate change. These were all experiences that were very satisfying, but which contributed new information and enabled us to also keep abreast of developments in the field. We supported Ethiopia, parts of the Green Legacy project. See, one of the things that Ethiopia has done is you have invested Ethiopia's own resources in the construction of the Great Renaissance Dam. This is going to be a major contribution towards generating clean energy for Ethiopia and moving the country out of the use of fossil fuels. One of the results is that Ethiopia is now the leading country in the importation as well as the distribution of electric vehicles. Electric mobility is becoming the key model of mobility in Ethiopia. This is because Ethiopia can generate the clean energy from the Renaissance Dam. But a major threat to the Renaissance Dam was that there was always the possibility that there would be a lot of soil erosion and siltation from the catchment of the dam. So our contribution to the Green Legacy project was that we designed activities along the different catchment areas of the Great Renaissance Dam, where we supported the government to plant trees in order to reduce erosion, but we also supported the provision of clean cooking solutions in order to reduce the use of biomass, the use of those trees for cooking in those communities. We also created institutional mechanisms to manage those catchment areas. All of this contributes towards making the dam more sustainable, but it also makes the ecosystems more stable as well, and therefore contributes to the sustainability of clean energy in Ethiopia. So we see this as a holistic solution which is resolving many problems, many challenges, and actually placing Ethiopia as a leader on the African continent in renewable and clean energy.